So you married up, Victor laughed, while your loser grandpa clings to his pension. The table fell silent. My grandkids froze mid-bite. Emily looked down, twisting her napkin like it might disappear. But that wasn't the part that gutted me. No, what shattered me was her silence. She let him say it, in front of my family, in front of my blood. I excused myself, drove home through tears I blamed on the cold, and sat at Margaret's old desk, where a drawer I'd ignored for 10 years was waiting, filled with something Victor didn't know existed. That night I made a promise. Those wouldn't be the last words spoken about me. And when the screens lit up, everyone would finally see who the real loser was. My name is Arthur Bennett, and I'm 75 years old. Since Margaret passed, I've found peace in tending our modest bungalow and garden on Cedar Lane. My daughter Emily, a school counselor, with a gentle soul, brings her children to visit on Sundays. Though her husband Victor, my son-in-law who runs some flashy investment firm, barely masks his disdain for what he calls my pensioner's lifestyle. The house still carries Margaret's touches, from the lemon oil polish on the furniture to her old cedar bench weathering in the backyard. Something's been nagging at me lately about her desk drawer, the one she kept locked, filled with color-coded envelopes I never questioned. My garden shears paused mid-clip yesterday when I remembered how meticulously she filed everything. But let me start from the beginning. The drive to Emily and Victor's house was always longer than the 20 minutes it actually took. Maybe it was knowing what waited at the end. Victor's smirks, Emily's nervous glances, the weight of trying to keep peace for my grandchildren's sake. You know that feeling, when you're heading somewhere you'd rather not be. I pulled up to their oversized colonial just as the winter sun was setting. Through the bay windows, I could see the dining room chandelier blazing away, probably burning more electricity in an hour than my whole house did in a day. But I pushed that thought aside. This was for Emily and the kids. The front door opened before I could knock, and my youngest grandchild, Tommy, launched himself at my legs. "Grandpa, Mom made your favorite, pot roast." The warmth of rosemary and garlic wafted from the kitchen, almost making me forget why I'd been dreading this dinner. Emily appeared in her apron, flour dusting her cheek, and gave me a quick hug. "Dad, you're right on time. Victor's just opening the wine." Speaking of Victor, there he stood in his pressed shirt and designer watch, swirling red wine in a glass like he was auditioning for some fancy commercial. "Arthur," he nodded, not bothering to hide his once-over of my clean but well-worn sweater. The dining room table was set with what looked like new china, probably another of Victor's necessary upgrades to show off to his business friends. The kids had made place cards with careful crayon letters, and Tommy proudly led me to mine, right across from Victor. Perfect. We settled in, and I had to admit the food smelled amazing. Emily had learned her mother's pot roast recipe years ago, and that familiar aroma brought back Sunday dinners when Margaret was still with us. Back when meals were about family, not measuring up to Victor's standards. But before Emily could even start serving, Victor stood up, glass in hand. The crystal caught the light as he cleared his throat. You ever have that moment when you can feel something bad coming, but you're powerless to stop it? "I'd like to propose a toast," Victor announced, his smile all teeth and no warmth. "To Emily, who married up, while her father still clings to his loser's pension." The words landed like ice water. My fork stopped halfway to my plate, and the silence that followed was deafening. Even the kids sensed it, their usual chatter dying instantly. The grandfather clock in the corner, another of Victor's showing-off purchases, ticked so loudly it might as well have been hammering nails into my dignity. I looked at Emily, hoping, but she just studied her napkin, twisting it in her lap. My neck grew hot, and I could feel the flush creeping up toward my face. 43 years of logistics management, providing for my family, building a life with Margaret, all dismissed as nothing in 11 cruel words. "Thank you for the lovely meal," I managed, standing slowly. My chair scraped against the hardwood, another sound that seemed too loud in the frozen moment. "But I'm not feeling well, please excuse me." I walked to the hallway, where an ornate mirror reflected a man I barely recognized. When did my shoulders start to stoop like that? When did my eyes get so tired? Margaret would have known what to say, how to handle this with grace. But Margaret wasn't here. The drive home was a blur. I cracked the window, letting the winter air sting my eyes. Easier to blame the weather than admit I was crying. First time since Margaret's funeral, if I'm being honest with you. My hands shook a little as I set my keys down on Margaret's old desk. The locked drawer caught my eye, the one she'd always kept her important papers in. My fingers traced the brass handle, remembering how she'd organize everything by color, by date, by importance. A place for everything, she'd say, and everything in its place. Victor's words echoed in my head. Loser's pension. My hand closed around the small key I'd kept on my ring all these years. Looking at that drawer, I made a promise to myself, and to Margaret's memory. Those wouldn't be the final words on the matter. The key turned smoothly, as if it had been waiting for this moment. As I pulled the drawer open, the lamplight caught the edges of papers inside, neat and organized, just as she'd left them. I pulled out envelope after envelope, each one marked in Margaret's precise handwriting. Blue ink, always blue. She'd said black was too harsh for important things. The dates went back decades, long before Emily had even met Victor. My hands trembled slightly as I began arranging them across the desk's worn surface, creating a timeline I could follow. The first letter I opened made my breath catch. It was from a brokerage firm, dated spring of 1985. You know how sometimes the past reaches out and taps you on the shoulder? This was more like a thunderclap. The letterhead belonged to Madison and Brooks Investment Partners, same outfit Victor's always bragging about using. Dear Mrs. Bennett, it began, we confirm your purchase of 2,000 shares in Stanton Logistics Solutions. I had to read that twice. Stanton, Victor's company. Back then it was just an ambitious startup, the kind of investment most folks would call crazy. But Margaret, she'd always had a knack for seeing potential others missed. More envelopes revealed quarterly statements, dividend notices, stock splits. The numbers started small but grew steadily over the years. Each page was like another piece of a puzzle Margaret had been quietly assembling. Remember those old flip books where the pictures seemed to move? That's what these statements were showing. Me, the motion of money, growing, building, becoming something substantial. Oh, Margaret, I whispered, touching one of the more recent statements. You clever woman. The current value of those shares. It was enough to send all 3 grandkids to college. Enough to give Emily the security she deserved. A proper legacy, not just my loser's pension. My hands weren't quite steady as I slipped each document into a manila folder. But my mind was sharp as ever. I took photos of everything with my phone. Emily had taught me how last Christmas, thank goodness. Never hurts to have backups, right? In my old supervisor's notebook, the one with the ruled pages I'd kept all these years, I started making a timeline. Dates, share counts, major company events. It helped clear my head, seeing it all laid out neat and orderly. Some habits you never lose, and organizing information had been my life's work. But how to tell Emily? That was the real puzzle. I couldn't just drop this in her lap with accusations about Victor. She'd shut down, same way she had at dinner. No, this needed, what did Margaret always say? A gentle hand and a firm heart. The company name jumped out at me from every page. Stanton Logistics Solutions. I circled it twice in my notes, then underlined a particular clause that caught my eye. To rights of survivorship. Transfer to estate beneficiaries. Legal language, but clear enough. These shares were part of Margaret's estate, our estate. That had to mean something. I gathered everything into the folder and carried it to the kitchen table, where the morning light would hit it first. Sitting there in the quiet, I could almost smell Margaret's coffee, hear her humming as she planned her day. We'll sort this out, I promised her memory. Together, like always. My phone felt heavy as I picked it up, but my voice was steady when Emily answered. Hi, sweetheart. Could we meet for coffee tomorrow morning? Just the 2 of us? A pause, then her quiet, yes. Some conversations need to happen face to face, over a warm cup and with plenty of time to breathe. I set the phone down next to the folder and ran my fingers over Margaret's handwriting one more time. The letters that had waited so patiently in that drawer seemed to glow in the lamplight, full of purpose and possibility. The Bell and Brew had been our spot since Emily was in high school. Same corner table, same cinnamon rolls warming in the display case, same foggy windows that made the world outside look soft and far away. Perfect for difficult conversations. Emily was already there when I arrived, 2 steaming mugs in front of her. Her fingers kept tracing the rim of her cup, a nervous, habit she'd picked up from Margaret. The folder felt like lead in my hands as I slid into the seat across from her. "You look tired, Dad," she said, pushing my coffee closer. "Black, 2 sugars. Some things never change. Just been doing some organizing." I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, letting the heat sink in. "Found some interesting papers in your mother's desk." Emily's eyes flickered to the folder, but didn't ask about it. Instead, she started talking about the kids' science projects, their piano lessons. Anything but why we were really there. "You ever notice how people circle around hard topics, like moths around a porch light?" "Honey," I finally cut in, gentle as I could, "we need to talk about the family finances." Her shoulders tensed. "Victor says he's handling everything. He's got it all organized in trusts and portfolios, much more efficient than having things scattered around." There it was, that word. Efficient. It hung in the air between us like smoke. "When did this organizing start?" I kept my voice steady, the way I used to when she'd come home past curfew. She looked down at her coffee. "About 3 years ago, Victor said we needed to streamline things, protect assets for the kids." Her fingers went back to tracing the mug's rim. "He had all these papers drawn up by his lawyers. Said it was temporary, just to make everything cleaner for tax purposes." I nodded slowly, watching her face. "Do you remember signing anything about shares, stock certificates? There were so many documents." She pressed her lips together. "Victor explained them all, but it was complicated. He said I just needed to trust him, that he'd make sure everything was properly managed." My hand barely shook as I opened the folder and laid out Margaret's letters. One by one, like dealing cards in a game, I suddenly realized we might have already lost. Emily's eyes widened as she saw her mother's handwriting, then the company name, then the numbers. "Mom bought those?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Back then, she believed in planning ahead." I tapped the most recent statement. "These shares, they're worth quite a bit now." That's when I saw it. The moment everything clicked. Emily's face went pale, almost grey in the cafe's warm light. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh God, Dad, the trust transfer. I signed them over. Victor said it was just reorganizing, just—" She couldn't finish. "You know that feeling when ice water hits your spine?" That's what rolled down mine. All Margaret's careful planning, all those years of quiet investment, now sitting in Victor's trust. My scalp prickled cold as hope drained away. "Emily," I kept my voice gentle, "I need to see that trust document, the actual transfer papers." She nodded quickly, almost desperately. "They're in Victor's office. I'll scan them tonight, text them to you." Her hands were shaking now. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "This isn't your fault." I reached across and squeezed her trembling fingers. "Your mother trusted you, and you trusted your husband. That's what families do." Outside, the winter afternoon was fading. Emily's porch light had clicked on automatically, throwing uncertain shadows across her driveway as I sat in my car, watching. The folder on the passenger seat seemed to mock me with its weight. I thought about Emily's face when she recognized her signature, the way fear and love had tangled in her eyes. Which one had pushed her to sign those papers? Which one kept her quiet now? No time for lengthy reflection. I had to see Victor tonight, had to face him before doubt could root deeper in Emily's heart. But first I sat there watching that porch light flicker, gathering strength from memories of Margaret's quiet determination. Where dignity dies. I pulled into Victor's curved driveway at 8 sharp. The house loomed like some glass and stone monument to success, every window blazing despite the energy bills he loved complaining about. You know the type, the kind of place that screams, "I've made it," so loud it drowns out everything else. The housekeeper led me to his study, all polished mahogany and leather-bound books I'd bet hadn't been opened since they were placed there. Victor sat behind a desk big enough to land a plane on, barely glancing up from his laptop. "Arthur." He drew out my name like it was something stuck to his shoe. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" I laid Margaret's folder on his desk, keeping my voice level. "Found some interesting paperwork. Thought we should discuss it." At this hour, but he was already reaching for the documents, that practiced smile slipping as he recognized the letterhead. His fingers moved through the pages with practiced efficiency, pausing at the share certificates. "Have you ever watched a snake before it strikes?" That's what his smile reminded me of, all teeth and cold calculation. "Well, well," he leaned back, running a hand over his precise haircut. Margaret was quite the secret investor, wasn't she? But surely you've seen the trust documents? He reached into a drawer, pulled out a leather portfolio, and tapped a perfectly manicured nail against a highlighted section. Full transfer of assets, signed and notarized. Emily's signature right there. My throat went dry. Those shares were meant for the children's future. Margaret's not here. He cut me off with a wave. And what's done is done. The shares are part of my trust now, legally binding. He slid my folder back across the desk like he was discarding junk mail. Really, you should thank me. I'm managing these assets far better than a retiree could. The leather chair creaked as I leaned forward. Victor, there must be some middle ground, something that protects Emily and the kids while... His laugh stopped me cold. Middle ground, please. He stood, straightening his cuffs. Consider those shares tuition for Emily marrying up, though honestly, given their current value, I'd say she got quite a bargain. The room suddenly felt too small, too warm. Awards and framed newspaper headlines stared down from the walls. Rising star in tech, innovation leader, business visionary. All that glass and glory, reflecting a man who saw my wife's legacy as pocket change. We're family, I tried one last time. Surely we can... Family? He snorted. Family is about evolution, Arthur. The strong leading the weak. Emily understood that when she signed those papers. He turned back to his laptop. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual business to attend to. I don't remember walking out. Just the sound of my shoes on marble, then the bite of winter air, then sitting in my car watching rain trace patterns on the windshield. My hands shook on the steering wheel, and something hot and tight coiled in my throat. The drive home passed in a blur. I stacked Margaret's documents on the kitchen table, neat piles I couldn't bring myself to read again. The clock ticked past midnight while I sat there, staring out at the garden where our old bench was just a shadow against deeper shadows. If I closed my eyes, I could hear Margaret's voice, careful and clear, as always. Details matter, Arthur. The smallest oversight can change everything. My phone buzzed, startling me. Unknown number. I stared at the screen, wondering what else this night could possibly throw at me. The phone's glow cut through the darkness. Unknown number. This late. Part of me wanted to let it ring, but something in Margaret's voice, still echoing in my head, made me answer. Arthur. Frank Malloy here. The name hit me like a splash of cold water. Frank, my old army buddy. The one who never missed sending a Christmas card, even after Margaret passed. His voice hadn't changed, still that steady drill sergeant tone that could cut through chaos. Emily called me, he continued, said you might need a different kind of accountant, one who remembers what loyalty means. Bring everything you've got, and I mean everything, to my office. First light. I glanced at Margaret's papers. Neat, stacks throwing shadows in the dim kitchen. Frank, I can't ask you to... You're not asking, I'm telling, 6 a.m. sharp. He rattled off an address and hung up before I could protest. Sleep wasn't happening, so I spent the night organizing. Every letter, every statement, even the trust documents Emily had texted over. By the time dawn started painting the sky, I was pulling into a tired strip mall where a sign read Malloy Financial Forensics in no-nonsense block letters. The smell hit me first when I opened the door, that sharp mix of toner and coffee that means someone's been working long hours. Frank stood behind a desk, cluttered with monitors, looking exactly like I remembered. Stocky, crew-cut gone silver, reading glasses perched low on his nose. Those glasses had always reminded me of Margaret's, the way they caught the light when she was deep in thought. Still punctual as artillery, he said, waving me to a chair. Let's see what you've brought me. I spread everything out. The timeline I'd made, Margaret's letters, the trust paperwork. Frank didn't say a word, just pulled out a pencil and started making notes in a ledger. His hand moved steady and sure like he was defusing a bomb one number at a time. The silence stretched until he circled something, then circled it again. These dividend declarations, he muttered. They don't match the deposit dates, not by a long shot. He tapped his keyboard and another screen lit up. And look here. Public notice just posted. Victor's hosting some big investor dinner in 5 days. Live stream to every major backer he's got. My stomach tightened. What does that mean for us? Means we've got exactly one shot at this. Frank pulled up a calendar. Timing's everything. We need an injunction filed before he starts throwing around those projections. Once those numbers hit the room, he shook his head. The damage gets a lot harder to contain. Something electric ran through me. Fear and purpose tangled together, making my spine straighten like it used to before a mission. What do you need from me? Stay close, answer questions fast when they come. Sign whatever the court wants, moment I tell you to. Frank was already reaching for his phone. I've got some judges who understand what urgent means. The printer started humming, spitting out page after page. Frank's fingers flew over the keyboard, and I could see more documents taking shape on his screens. A clock started ticking in my head. 5 days, counting down. One more thing, Frank said, not looking up. Emily said Victor laughed at you? I nodded, that hot knot forming in my throat again. Good. Now he did look up, and I saw something fierce behind those reading glasses. Makes him sloppy, makes him think he's already won, and that's exactly where we want him. The printer kept churning as I stood to leave. Through the window I could see the sun climbing higher, marking the start of our countdown. 5 days to prepare. 5 days until Victor's big moment. 5 days to get everything exactly right. The next morning my hands shook a little as I handed Frank another stack of papers. Emily had been up half the night, sending scan after scan from Victor's home office while he was away at some conference. Each new document felt like another piece of ammunition. Good girl, Frank muttered, spreading them across his desk. These are exactly what we needed. You ever watch one of those crime shows where they've got strings connecting photos on a wall? That's what Frank's computer screens looked like, except instead of mugshots, it was all spreadsheets and bank statements. Red lines flowed between company accounts and names I'd never heard of. Shell companies, Frank called them. See this? He pointed to a column of numbers. These are the official dividend payments Victor's company declared. But look here. His finger slid to another screen. These special distributions are going somewhere else entirely. The amounts don't match, not even close. I leaned in, squinting at dates and dollar signs that made my head spin. What does that mean? It means, Frank said, clicking through more emails with special distribution in the subject line, that someone's been siphoning money, moving it around where shareholders can't see it, and doing a pretty sloppy job of hiding the tracks. The office hummed with printers and computers, reminding me of Margaret's sewing machine, how it would purr steady and sure while she worked. She'd have understood all this better than me. Numbers were her language. Here's the beauty part, Frank continued, pulling up another document. Because Margaret's estate is still listed as the original owner on these custodial records, he tapped the screen. You've got standing legal right to demand answers, to protect those assets. A notary arrived around noon. I signed affidavit after affidavit, swearing to where I'd found Margaret's envelopes, how they'd been sealed, what dates were written in her hand. Each signature felt like laying another brick in a wall Victor couldn't break down. Frank was on the phone most of the afternoon, talking to someone he called the best securities attorney this side of New York. Words like emergency relief and immediate disclosure bounced around the room. I watched binders grow thick with tabbed sections, every page stamped with dates and times like they were marking evidence at a crime scene. Around 3 I needed air. The numbers were swimming, and my neck felt tight from bending over documents. Outside, the strip mall parking lot was quiet, except for a few pigeons pecking at dropped French fries. I pulled out my phone and looked at the photo of Margaret's garden bench I kept as my background. I'm trying, I whispered to it. I know you kept those papers for a reason. Something caught my eye. A small brass screw that had worked loose from the armrest in the photo. It had been sitting in my junk drawer for months, waiting to be put back. I'd absent-mindedly dropped it in my pocket that morning. Now I rolled it between my fingers, feeling its threads, solid and real, like a little piece of home telling me to hold on. When I walked back in, Frank was hanging up his phone. He looked up at me, and his face had that same expression he used to get before we'd go out on patrol. Focused, certain, ready. We file before close, he said. Today. Those 5 words sucked all the air out of the room. I gripped the screw in my pocket harder, its edges pressing into my palm. Today? My voice sounded far away, but I thought we had... Times change. Frank was already reaching for his coat. And right now, time's on our side. You ready? Ready? I thought of Emily checking her phone for Victor's return. Of my grandchildren, who deserved better than a legacy built on lies. Of Margaret's careful handwriting on all those envelopes, saving proof for exactly this moment. I pulled out the screw and set it on Frank's desk. Let's do it. Ever notice how time gets weird when you're racing against it? The digital clock on Frank's dashboard kept jumping forward in chunks while we sat trapped at red. Lights, brake lights bleeding across the windshield like spilled wine. Come on, Frank muttered, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. He'd stuffed our binders into a rolling briefcase that took up most of the back seat. Every time we hit a bump, I could hear the papers shifting inside, like Margaret's voice whispering, "Hurry!" The courthouse loomed ahead, all granite and columns. Made me think of those westerns where the sheriff stands on the steps waiting for high noon. Except our showdown would happen in a fluorescent-lit office with a clerk who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. "File stamp goes here," she droned, pointing at corners, while Frank handed over exhibit after exhibit. The proposed order sat on top, the one demanding Victor show his real numbers to every investor before that fancy dinner of his. My hands were sweating, just looking at it. You know, that moment when you're about to jump into cold water and your whole body tenses up. That's how it felt walking into the duty judge's chambers. Dark wood paneling, law books everywhere, and a nameplate that read, "Onon Patricia Reeves." "Raise your right hand," the clerk instructed. I did, and suddenly my throat went dry as sand. The oath came out rough, like I was gargling gravel. Judge Reeves peered at me over reading glasses, then dove into the petition. Minutes stretched like taffy while she read. Pages turned. Her pen made little marks. Every so often she'd look up at me, then back down. I fought the urge to explain, to tell her about Sunday dinners and Victor's smirk and Margaret's careful filing system, but Frank had been clear, speak only when spoken to. "Standing," she finally said, tapping the trust schedule. "Why should Mr. Bennett have any say in these transactions?" Frank stepped forward, pointing to paragraphs I'd memorized but couldn't quite understand. "The estate's original ownership status was never properly terminated, Your Honor, and these dividend irregularities—" He flipped to another tab. "They suggest a pattern of—" "I can read, Mr. Malloy." Judge Reeves held up a hand. She studied one more page, then closed the binder. "I'll review thoroughly and post my decision electronically by morning. Clerk will stamp it under advisement." Just like that we were done. No gavel, no dramatic speech, just a rubber stamp and a promise of more waiting. Outside, the air hit my face like a wet towel. Storm clouds had rolled in while we were inside, making the whole city smell like rain and hot steel. I looked up at those clouds and wondered if they'd break before morning, before we knew if all this mattered. "Back to the office," Frank said, already heading for the car. "We need to prep the compliance packet for the investor portal. If the judge gives us the green light, we'll need to move fast." The rest of the afternoon blurred into scanning, labeling, and organizing files into folders with names like Exhibit a Final V2. My eyes burned from staring at the screen, but Frank kept going like a machine. At 7, he finally called it. "Nothing more we can do tonight," he said, shutting down his computer. "Get some sleep. Set your alarm for 5:59. "Why 5:59? "Because the system updates at 6. 1 minute early means we see it the second it posts." I put my phone face down on the nightstand when I got home. Didn't want to watch those minutes tick by, each one carrying a question I couldn't answer. Instead, I stared at my monitor's black screen, seeing only my reflection. An old man waiting to learn if justice still had any fight left in it. The vacant screen reminded me of Margaret's mirror, the one she'd used to check her appearance before church. Presentation matters, she'd always say. Tomorrow would prove just how right she was about that. I woke up at 4:47 a.m., my body clock refusing to wait for the alarm. Funny how anticipation works. Feels like being a kid on Christmas morning, except Santa might be bringing either presents or coal. The house was dark and quiet, just the hum of the refrigerator keeping me company. You ever try to make coffee while your hands are shaking? Took me 3 tries just to get the filter in right. I kept glancing at my phone, knowing the court system wouldn't update for another hour, but checking anyway. Each refresh showed the same thing. Pending. At 5:30 I couldn't stand it anymore and drove to Frank's office. Found him already there, tie loose around his neck, staring at his monitor like it might speak to him. "Coffee's fresh," he said without looking up. "Got cream in the mini-fridge." We sat there refreshing browsers, neither of us talking much. The clock on the wall ticked so loud it felt like it was inside my skull. At 5:58, Frank started hitting refresh every few seconds. Then at 6 hours sharp, there it was in blue letters. Order granted. My legs went weak. Good thing I was sitting down. Frank let out a whistle and started reading conditions aloud. Full freeze on transfers. Mandatory disclosure. Forensic summaries must be presented to all investors before any solicitation. He grinned. Judge Reeves came through. Now we move. Frank's fingers flew across the keyboard, uploading everything we'd prepared. The transfer records, those mismatched dividend reports, charts showing where the money really went. All of it tagged and organized, ready to display on the investor portal. Look at this, he said, pointing to a line in the dinner invitation's AV brief. Portal feeds directly to the presentation screens. Whatever's on the investor site shows up on every monitor in that ballroom. He chuckled. Victor's own setup working against him. I pulled out my phone and stared at Emily's number for a good minute before typing, "Meet me outside the Grand Hotel at 6 p.m. I'll explain everything. No forgiveness needed, just truth." The rest of the day moved like molasses. Frank and I got into our suits, both dark, both a little loose. Mine still had the price tag fold marks, hadn't worn it since Margaret's funeral. We arrived at the hotel just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the valets and doormen. Red and gold banners hung from the entrance. Stanton Ventures Investor, Appreciation Dinner. A crew was testing projectors, flashing logos and growth charts on temporary screens. Made me think of Margaret's slideshows from our vacations, except these pictures told a different kind of story. The lobby buzzed with early arrivals in expensive suits and cocktail dresses. Nobody gave us a second look, just two more old men in dark suits, probably someone's accountants. We found seats near the back of the ballroom, where we could see everything but stay out of sight. Above, the stage, a digital countdown clock ticked away. 15 minutes, 14, 13. I reached into my pocket and felt the screw from Margaret's bench, smooth from years of polish and care. Rolled it between my fingers like a worry stone. 10 seconds now. My heart fell into rhythm with those final numbers. 9, 8, 7. The lights began to dim. 6, 5, 4. Champagne glasses clinked. 3, 2, 1. The ballroom doors closed with a soft click, and I gripped that screw so tight I could feel every thread. The double doors sealed us in darkness, and spotlights caught Victor strutting across the stage like he owned more than just the company. He looked exactly like he had at that Sunday dinner. Same practiced smile, same golden cufflinks catching the light. Guess some people never change their script. Know what it's like watching someone at the peak of their pride, right before reality kicks in. It's like seeing a kid run full speed toward a glass door. You want to shout a warning, but you know it's too late. Victor raised his crystal flute, and the crowd of about 200 went quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "welcome to an evening celebrating unstoppable growth." The word unstoppable hit me like that dinner toast all over again. Amazing how some wounds stay fresh. Behind him, a massive LED screen lit up with the company logo, sleek, modern, probably cost more than my house. A video started playing, all dramatic music and rising charts. I could smell the expensive perfumes and aftershaves mixing with the tension in the air. Then it happened. The screen flickered once, twice. The sizzle reel stuttered, froze, and disappeared. For a second, everything went black. Victor's smile twitched but held. "Minor, technical," he started. But it wasn't technical. Difficulties. Not really. The screen came back to life, but now it showed Frank's disclosure portal. Crystal clear, court-ordered, and devastating. The first slide was simple. A flow chart showing company funds moving through a maze of shell corporations. Red arrows traced the path of siphoned money, each one a nail in Victor's coffin. You could hear ice cubes hitting glass as drinks stopped halfway to lips. The whispers started in the back, spread like fire through dry grass. A woman in pearls gasped. The man next to her fumbled for his reading glasses. Next slide, dividend declarations versus actual payments. The numbers didn't match, not even close. The difference was highlighted in angry red, millions of dollars that should have gone to shareholders, but vanished into Victor's private accounts. A venture capitalist 3 rows ahead of me flipped open his laptop, fingers flying, across the keys, probably checking his own records against what he was seeing. To my left, a man in a pinstriped suit, had to be from one of the pension funds, held up his phone, photographing the court order seal that watermarked each slide. Emily sat at the front table, her back to me until now. She turned slowly, scanning the room until she found me. Even from this distance, I could see the moment it all clicked into place. 10 years of Victor's lies unraveled in her eyes. She didn't look angry or sad, just suddenly completely awake. Victor's composure cracked. He lunged for a cable bundle near the podium, yanking cords like he could strangle the truth back into hiding. "Kill the feed," he barked at 2 AV technicians who looked more confused than helpful. "Switch to backup." He grabbed a remote from the podium, jabbing buttons rapid fire. But each click just refreshed the displays, cycling through more damning evidence, bank statements, transfer records, everything Frank and I had compiled, now playing on a loop on every screen in the room. I thought I'd feel something bigger in this moment. Satisfaction, maybe. Vindication. But standing there in my funeral suit, that old screw from Margaret's bench still pressed into my palm, all I felt was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm, when you're assessing the damage and planning how to rebuild. The first chair scraped back somewhere in the middle of the room. A silver-haired man in an expensive suit stood up, shaking his head. Others followed, like the first few drops before a downpour. Security guards moved toward the stage, not sure if they were trying to help Victor or stop him from destroying equipment. I stepped into the aisle, my shoes silent on the thick carpet. Didn't need to get closer. Didn't need to say a word. The numbers were doing all the talking now, and they had a lot to say. I stood in the corridor where potted palms cast long shadows across marble floors, watching the exodus. The elevators chimed every few minutes, each one carrying away another group of shell-shocked investors. Their phones buzzed constantly, probably calling lawyers, accountants, damage control teams. You could almost smell the panic. Remember those nature shows, where a swarm of birds suddenly changes direction, all at once? It was like that. One moment Victor had them eating out of his hand, the next they couldn't get away fast enough. Funny how quickly unstoppable growth can stop when the truth shows up uninvited. Emily found me near a brass planter filled with some kind of tropical flowers I couldn't name. Margaret would have known. She could identify any plant just by its leaves. Emily's hands were shaking as she held the printout of the court order, creasing it unconsciously. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the murmur of departing guests. "I should have seen it, should have asked more questions." I wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault, that Victor had fooled plenty of sophisticated investors too, but sometimes silence says more than words. I just squeezed her hand, and she squeezed back, the same signal we used when she was little and scared of thunderstorms. Frank appeared with 2 serious-looking men in dark suits who had federal agency written all over them. They weren't here by accident. Frank had made some calls while we waited for the screens to change. He huddled with them near a service entrance, pointing at specific pages in the disclosure packet. "They want everything," Frank told me quietly when he broke away. "Full forensic work papers, original documents, the whole trail. They're putting an immediate hold on all records. Nothing gets shredded, nothing gets accidentally deleted." I nodded. The machinery of justice was grinding into motion, slow but unstoppable, kind of poetic, really. "Emily," I said, turning to my daughter, "take the kids home. When the notices start coming in, let the lawyers do the talking." She started to protest, but I held up a hand. "Trust me on this. 1. It's about to get very technical and very legal. The best thing you can do is stay clear and keep the children away from the circus." She hesitated, then nodded. Smart girl. Always was. I walked back to the ballroom entrance, drawn by some need to witness the final act. Victor was still there, jabbing at his laptop like a drowning man poking holes in a life raft. He had a USB drive plugged in, probably trying to load some sanitized version of the numbers. Didn't matter. Nobody was left to see them. The grand room that had buzzed with anticipation an hour ago now felt like a theater after the show. All empty chairs and half-filled water glasses. Plates of untouched hors d'oeuvres sat abandoned on white tablecloths. Someone's forgotten reading glasses caught the light. I pulled out my phone and took a few pictures. The empty tables, the scattered papers, the big screen still frozen on, that ironic growth story slide. Maybe I didn't need photos to remember this moment, but something in me wanted proof. Wanted to know that years from now, I could look back and know it wasn't just some dream I had on Margaret's garden bench. The AV techs were starting their teardown, unplugging cables and rolling up cords. The house sound system died with a soft pop, leaving only the shuffle of hotel staff wheeling cart after cart toward the service exits. Dishes clinked softly, like wind chimes announcing a change in weather. I took one long, slow breath. The air still carried traces of expensive cologne and coffee, mixed now with the sharper scent of fear. You could almost taste the millions of dollars evaporating into the air conditioning. You know what they say about karma. It might take the scenic route, but it always arrives right on schedule. The weeks after that investor, dinner felt like watching dominoes fall in slow motion, each one triggering something bigger. Every morning brought a fresh stack of paperwork. You ever notice how justice comes dressed in manila envelopes these days? I spent more time initialing documents than I had since buying our first house with Margaret back in '73. The agencies, and there were quite a few of them, wanted statements, affidavits, and copies of everything Frank had already shown them. Twice. Reporters started camping out near Victor and Emily's place like cats at a mouse hole. Poor Emily had to sneak the kids out the back door just to get them to school. The headlines got nastier by the day. Tech CEO's House of Cards collapses was just the warm-up act. By week 2, they weren't pulling any punches. Serial fraud exposed and shareholders demand arrests splashed across every business page in the state. Victor's company didn't stand a chance once the receiver stepped in. You should have seen the looks on those regulatory folks' faces when they started digging through the books, like archaeologists uncovering a whole city of financial sins buried under years of cooked numbers. Then came the letter I'd been waiting for. Legal language is about as warm as February rain, but the message was clear enough. Those shares Margaret had bought all those years ago, they were coming home. The court appointed a special master to oversee the transfer into a protected account for Emily's kids. Margaret would have liked that. She always said grandchildren were the best investment. I remember standing in the garden that evening, watering can in hand, watching the sun sink behind Mrs. Peterson's maple tree. The tomatoes were coming in strong, pushing out new growth like they couldn't help themselves. I tried practicing gratitude out loud, the way my doctor suggested after Margaret passed. Felt strange at first, like speaking a foreign language, but standing there among the plants we'd tended together, it started feeling more natural. Writing to Emily was harder. How do you tell your daughter you love her but need space? That forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. I must have drafted that letter a dozen times before I got it right. Kept it simple in the end. The money's secure, you're still my girl, let's take it slow. Later that week I finally tackled the garage. Hadn't been in there properly since Margaret. You know how it goes. Some spaces just hold too many memories to visit casually. But there it was, her old cedar bench pushed against the back wall where I'd left it. The wood had aged to that soft grey that comes from years of sun and rain before I'd moved it inside. Found a jar of loose screws on the workbench. Probably collected them over time whenever one worked its way free. I ran my hand along the armrest, remembering how Margaret used to sit out there with her morning coffee, planning her garden like a military campaign. The grain had gone dull, thirsty for oil, but the bones were still strong. Good cedars like that outlasts almost anything if you give it half a chance. It took some doing, but I managed to carry it out to the patio. Set up everything just so. Sandpaper in different grits, teak oil Margaret always insisted on using, rags, and that one polished screw I'd been carrying around like a lucky penny since this whole thing started. Standing there with my hands on the bench's back, I could almost hear Margaret saying, "Well, what are you waiting for?" Wood won't restore itself. She was right, of course. She usually was. You want to know something funny? That moment, surrounded by my simple tools and this bench that needed saving, felt more like victory than anything that happened in that fancy hotel ballroom. Maybe because this was something I could fix with my own hands. No lawyers required. I was up before the sun that Saturday, couldn't sleep anyway. You know how it is when you've got a project calling your name. The morning air had that perfect feel to it. Not too warm, not too cool. Just right for working with your hands. The cedar responded beautifully to the final sanding. Ever notice how some woods seem to wake up under your fingers? With each stroke of the fine grit paper, that old bench started remembering what it used to be. The dust kicked up smelled like honey and memories. Margaret always said cedar was special that way, how it could hold on to summer even in the middle of winter. My phone buzzed while I was working. These days I've got alerts set for anything involving Victor's company. Force of habit, I suppose. This one was different, though. The regulators had made it official. Complete seizure of assets, top to bottom. The business pages were having a field day. One headline read, "Tech Empire Crumbles Inside the Fraud That Fooled Wall Street." Another called it, "The House That Lies Built." Comments from major investors were rolling, in all of them backing away from Victor like he had the plague. Remember those fancy investor dinners he used to throw? Now the same people who'd raised glasses to his genius were falling over themselves to condemn him. One venture capital firm put out a statement saying they were deeply disturbed by the systematic deception. Even his old college buddies in the industry were dropping quotes about how they always suspected something wasn't quite right. I won't lie. Part of me felt a twinge of satisfaction, but mostly I just felt tired. The kind of tired that comes after you've carried something heavy for too long and can finally set it down. The bench needed my attention more than those headlines did. I'd saved that last screw, the one I'd been carrying around since this whole thing started, for the final touch. Felt right somehow, completing the circle. The threads bit into the wood with a solid grip, and the arm stopped wobbling for the first time in years. The sun had climbed higher while I worked, throwing nice warm light across the patio. I grabbed the teak oil, Margaret's favorite, wouldn't use anything else, and started working it into the grain. Each pass with the cloth brought out deeper honey tones like the wood was blushing under attention. When I finished, the cedar glowed the exact shade of strong tea with afternoon light through it. Figured it was time. I took a picture of the bench, tried to catch how the sunlight played across the restored wood, sent it to Emily with just those few words. "A seat is ready when you are. No pressure, no demands. Just an open door if she wanted to walk through it." You know what the funny thing about garden benches is? They're meant for sitting, sure, but they're really meant for pausing, for taking a moment to just be. So that's what I did. Settled myself down right there, feeling the solid cedar under me, hearing it creak a quiet hello. And let me tell you, it was like laying down a sandbag I'd been carrying since that dinner at Victor's. Since that moment when he'd tried to make me small, the weight just lifted, right out of my ribs like smoke rising from a dying fire. The bees were busy in the lavender Margaret had planted years ago. Fat, fuzzy things, bumbling from stem to stem, humming their own little work songs. They didn't care about company takeovers or newspaper headlines or family drama. They just knew there was sweetness to be found, and they were going to find it. Looking out over our garden, yes, still our garden, Margaret's and mine, I heard myself say it out loud, like some kind of garden variety philosopher. Respect is wealth no one can steal. The bees kept humming, the cedar kept warming in the sun, and somewhere in all that simple rightness I found my peace.